Coming up on Talking Points, derailment aftermath. America's Transportation Secretary visits East Palestine in the weeks since that catastrophic accident. What he had to say next.
Plus, tensions rising once again between the United States and China. We'll take a deep dive into what could happen among these elevated transgressions.
And looking back, Friday marked 1 year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. What's happened to this point and what could happen in the year ahead. Talking Points starts right now. The 2024 Republican primary is heating up as new candidates emerge. Good evening. Welcome to Talking Points. I'm Chilekasi, Adele.
And I'm Teagan Brown. A new nonprofit is hitting Florida Governor Ron DeSantis go national as he moves toward a 2024 presidential bid. Talking Points analyst Gustavo Adolfo Madero joins us now. Gustavo, what is this nonprofit and what plans have they stated for DeSantis' campaign future?
Good evening, Teagan and Chile. This newly launched non-for-profit organization goes by the name And to the Republic, which, according to corporate records in Michigan, shows it was formed on January 30th, 2023. This non-for-profit that is supporting Ron DeSantis' national political activity hosted 3 events last Monday in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. In these events, Florida governor spoke in front of law enforcement officers in order to spotlight the state policies that have been working and those which are clearly not. In his appearance in New York, he mentioned how he was recruiting police officers who are tired of the Big Apple's progressive policies. Following that, when he visited the suburbs of Philadelphia and Chicago, he tweaked at Democratic politicians who relied on woke prosecutors and anti-police talk. The organization has stated that they will be announcing more events for the future in the upcoming weeks and months, with its latest one being tomorrow at North Venice, Florida. And To the Republic is registered as a 501c4 issue advocacy organization. What this means is that they are a type of nonprofit that doesn't have to disclose its donors, but can spend and raise unlimited amounts of money advocating for the policies it supports. DeSantis joins a state of other Republican presidential contenders, which include former Vice President Mike Pence and former U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley, who have been benefiting from these non-for-profit advocacy groups. It's important to note that these nonprofits have been active for years, supporting their policies, raising money, and building large email lists that will serve as the backbones of the presidential campaigns that will be launched later this year. And other efforts to raise his national visibility ahead of a likely presidential bid, next week, DeSantis is launching a new book called The Courage to Be Free, Florida's Blueprint for American Survival. And later in the week, he will be hosting a 3-day donor retreat at the Four Seasons at Palm Beach, which is expected to draw a total of 150 supporters.
Gustavo, let's go back to that first point you mentioned about And to the Republic, registered as an advocacy group. Can you tell us why we've seen an increase in politicians doing things like this?
Well, filing your non-for-profit as an advocacy group has been something that has been increasingly popular among politicians eyeing down the White House. In the 2024 presidential elections, there are around 12 potential presidential candidates that have these advocacy groups tied to them. Now, what makes these groups so appealing is that politicians they can fund their campaigns and get money from mega donors without having to divulge where they got the money from until months after the fact. Now, we don't know how many of these organizations currently exist. Due to that, they don't have to file taxes until 11 plus months after the fiscal year ends.
And Gustavo, I want to go back to Ron DeSantis. Where does he stand in these elections? Do you think that there's some sort of strong chance for him, especially with the Republican pool that we have right now?
Well, Teagan, although he hasn't formally announced that he is running for president, many Republican supporters speculate that he will be joining the race after the legislative Florida session ends later in the spring. And once he does, he will be entering the race as the strongest GOP rival to former President Donald Trump. Now, given the Quinnipiac University polls, I think he has a very good chance because him and former President Trump are not that far away. So if he campaigns correctly, I believe he will. Thank you.
Gustavo, thank you, and we'll continue covering that here on Talking Points and on CitrusTV News as well. Now to the latest update on that Ohio train derailment. House Republicans have now launched a probe into Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg's handling of the incident, and Buttigieg is shaking it off on Twitter. Talking Points analyst Jake Morel is in studio with more on what's going on in East Palestine and Capitol Hill. Jake.
Chile and Teagan, good evening. And Chile, you're absolutely right. House Republicans just launching that probe on Friday. But how did we get here? Let's take a look back at our timeline of the train derailment. Starting in early February, February 3rd, 2023, that train derails carrying 11 cars with that chemical in it. 5 days later, citizens are allowed back in the town after being immediately evacuated. About a week later, the Environmental Protection Agency is on the ground in East Palestine, Ohio, beginning their investigation. If you take a look, 3 days later, Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, gave his first public statement on the train derailment. Then just a few days later, President Biden sending his own toxicologist to East Palestine. Pete Buttigieg finally visiting East Palestine on February 23rd, 20 days after the train derailment. And just the next day, the 21 House GOP members launched that probe into Buttigieg's handling of the incident. And let's look at exactly what they said here. They said, quote, "This incident is an environmental and public health emergency that now threatens Americans across state lines. Despite the U.S. Department of Transportation's responsibility to ensure safe and reliable transport in the United States, you ignored the catastrophe for over a week." So that probe directed right at Pete Buttigieg, who responded immediately on Twitter saying this: "I'm alarmed to learn that the chair of the House Oversight Committee thinks that the NTSB is part of our department. NTSB is independent and with good reason. Still, of course, we will fully review this and respond appropriately." So Buttigieg saying that the responsibility shouldn't fall directly on him after receiving this probe from the House GOP. But moving away from Capitol Hill and back to East Palestine here, let's take a look at some of the facts. 11 train cars carrying those chemicals derailed. The NTSB attributed this crash to an overheated axle that caused the derailment, and those chemicals that spilled killed more than 43,000 fish in the area, getting into the rivers, and those chemicals have now reached West Virginia as well as Pennsylvania and are continuing to spread. That's the latest that we've got in East Palestine. So Chile and Teagan, I'll send it right back to you guys.
Jake Morel, thank you. And as we get closer to election season, let's turn now to Michigan Senate. Alyssa Stolken announced her intentions to take the vacant seat in 2024. She has served 3 terms as a representative and is a former CIA intelligence officer. The current Senator, Debbie Stabenow, has announced she will not be running for re-election in 2024. So far, her only competitor is Republican Nikki Snyder.
To overseas now, earlier today, the UK and the European Union came to an agreement over the post-Brexit trade dispute with Northern Ireland. The agreement is now known as the Windsor Framework. It means goods can freely flow from the UK into Northern Ireland. Goods from the EU are going to Northern Ireland, are still subject for normal checks. All goods were checked before they could advance to the Republic of Ireland before the pact, and ends a long dispute over post-Brexit regulations.
The United States and China have been at odds over the past couple of years, with tensions truly rising just last month after the U.S. shot down a Chinese spy balloon over the coast of South Carolina. Talking Point senior analyst Olivia Maniscalco is in studio now. Olivia, what can you tell us about the animosity between these two countries right now?
Thanks, Teagan. Yeah, the U.S. and China are at a bit of a crossroads. After the spy balloon was shot down, the United States blacklisted 6 Chinese entities linked to the Chinese balloon program. On February 16th, the Chinese placed sanctions on 2 U.S. defense contractors. This is affecting businesses everywhere. A poll done by the U.S.-China Business Council, which represents over 200 American companies operating in China, reported that 87% of respondents said the tensions are affecting their business operations. A part of the tension has to do with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. China has strengthened its ties with Moscow since the Russian invasion of Ukraine just over a year ago. Their trade hit a record of $190 billion last year. United States Deputy Secretary of the Treasury Wally Adeyemo spoke in Washington last Tuesday.
Fundamentally, we think that, like any other jurisdiction, China has to make choices about what they are willing to do and whether they want to be part of the global system that represents 50% of the global economy, or whether they want to strengthen their ties with Russia.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. said on February 18th that the U.S. is strengthening that the U.S. intelligence suggests China is considering assisting Russia with weapons and ammunition. This makes it hard for the United States to know how much they can trust the Chinese government. Last week, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Yi held an informal meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, where Blinken warned him of the consequences if China provided material support to Russia or help with sanction evasion.
Olivia joining us at the desk now. President Biden is considering rolling out an executive order that would basically prevent China from using U.S. technology to enhance their military. You know, why is he thinking about doing this?
Yes, so, you know, a lot of American companies operate in China, and a lot of their technologies kind of get infiltrated into Chinese companies, that sort of thing. And actually, the Center for Security and Emerging Technologies at Georgetown University published a report saying that the U.S. investment in Chinese artificial intelligence actually has brought intangible benefits to Chinese companies, including expertise, mentorship, and name recognition, which could benefit the Chinese military eventually. Actually, though, in October, the president announced that the U.S. would bar American companies from exporting advanced semiconductor chips and manufacturing equipment to China unless the companies got special licenses. So they are starting to do something, and the question is, how far will they go?
Olivia, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Coming up on Talking Points, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon is being sued for unpaid legal bills. We'll break down the legal challenges he faces after the break.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Hey, welcome back to Talking Points. Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries are reportedly talking about creating a bipartisan committee to set ground rules on removing congresspeople from their committees. Peter Barry joins us to debrief the situation. Peter, I guess a lot of people are concerned. Over the past couple of years, you see a lot of people being removed from committees, that this kind of process is getting political. Why is this being proposed?
It's being proposed because there's no current formal process of people getting removed from committees. And Speaker McCarthy was strongly criticized by the Democrats when he removed House members Schiff, Swalwell, and Omar from key committees. And having a bipartisan committee could avert future controversies from occurring like McCarthy's was a few weeks ago.
So can you tell us a little bit about why Jeffries and the Democratic Party is, considering partnering with McCarthy after he removed some of their own party from these committees?
So there's little to no reason for Jeffries to trust McCarthy. However, they're going to use this bipartisan alliance as a tool to attack McCarthy if he starts removing more Democrats from committees. Also, McCarthy and Jeffries are teaming up because they both recognize how narrow the margin between Republicans and Democrats is in the House. The GOP holds 222 seats, while the Dems hold 212. And McCarthy wants a process in place before the November 2024 election, so the committee removal process has been established. And McCarthy, Minority Leader Jeffries also wants it done just in case he's the next Speaker of the House in 2025.
Yeah, a lot to say with a lot of implications. Peter Barry, thank you so much.
And former advisor to President Trump, Steve Bannon, is being sued for around $500,000 in unpaid legal bills. This debt could mean legal consequences for Bannon. Here to speak more on that and what led up to it is Talking Points analyst Harrison Calder. Harrison?
Good evening, Teagan in Chile. Steve Bannon, White House strategist of former President Donald Trump, hasn't paid his legal dues, and a former law firm that represented him is now suing him for $500,000. The law firm representing Bannon took on high-profile cases, such as when he was subpoenaed by the House's investigation committee involving January 6th. He was also rumored to have defrauded donors who had given money to help build a wall along the southern border. Then President Donald Trump pardoned Bannon for some of these actions, mainly the We Build the Wall campaign, which 3 others involved were convicted and still awaiting their sentences. But even with all of these allegations dropped, it still doesn't cover the $500,000 he's yet to pay. Bannon is currently to serve a 4-month prison sentence for contempt of Congress, and it may come out to be more, as another state fraud charge has come out against him. Steve Bannon is yet to comment on this situation, but we'll see how it pans out for him in the coming weeks.
So with this almost $500,000 that he owes, do you expect him to pay it? And, what do you expect the sentence to look like going forward after all of this?
Yeah, so he has paid about $375,000 out of the $855,000 he was expected to pay, leaving about $480,000 left. He pleaded not guilty for things such as money laundering and fraud, so there's a lot to deal with there. He still hasn't commented on the situation, but we have seen in similar senses that 2 other co-defendants in a similar situation pleaded guilty, and another one decided to not plead guilty and got convicted, so it's not looking good for him in this sense.
Yeah, this isn't the first or the last time Steve Bannon will probably come in the news based off of what we know. Obviously, this is going to continue going on, but I want to focus on what this means for 2024. Will Donald Trump's campaign be affected by this in any way, shape, or form?
There's a lot. So, of course, Trump pardoned Bannon, of course, a few years ago, and that obviously has the personal connection tied to it. Of course, being the White House strategist, but only 2% of the pardons that were requested by Trump were actually granted. So that might say that people surrounded by Donald Trump were pardoned potentially more often than others. So there could be a lot in there, and that could hurt his campaign. But then again, we've seen the Trump campaign deal with a lot, and not much has hurt them. So we'll have to see what happens.
Great. Harrison, thank you so much. And coming up on Talking Points, it's been 1 year since Russia began their invasion of Ukraine. We'll break down how the war has affected so many people. Stay with us.
Meet Norm. He lives with anxiety, but with the help of this latest innovation from Be Normal, he can be normal, just like everyone else. With the swipe of a finger, you can project happiness, confidence, machismo. Why settle for being real when you can be normal? The Normal Maker. New from Be Normal. This item doesn't really work because there's no such thing as normal. We're all different. What we like, how our brains work. In fact, 1 in 5 of us live with mental illness. Don't filter who you are. Start by talking to someone you trust. And remember, there is no...
Welcome back to Talking Points. Demonstrations were held worldwide last Friday by people standing with the citizens of Ukraine. It's been 1 year since the invasion of Russian forces in Kyiv. Ericka Love is here to expand on the impacts of the war 1 year later.
Thanks, Teagan. In Bangkok, Paris, Sydney, and even here in New York, there were demonstrations of those standing in solidarity with Ukraine. People worldwide were singing the Ukrainian national anthem, hanging paper angels for children who have died in the war, and protesting outside of Russia's embassies abroad. Many Ukrainian Americans are saying they're hoping every option is exhausted by Western governments to prevent the next anniversary. But many Western governments are strategizing their next move after China released a peace plan last Friday, urging for a peaceful solution between Russia and Ukraine. This comes after months of increased pressure on China to pick a clear position in the war, as officials in Washington have worried that Beijing is considering sending military aid to Russia. China is in a tough position because they've been trying to enhance their relationship with the European Union, its largest trading partner, but without alienating Russia. President Emmanuel Macron of France called Beijing's engagement in peace efforts for Ukraine a good thing, but he also made clear that peace would only be possible if aggression stopped, if Russian troops withdrew, and if Ukrainian people and their territory were respected. President Biden, however, said on Friday night the idea of China negotiating the outcome of the war was just not rational. As a big push to move towards the ending of the war, the European Union passed its 10th round of sanctions against Moscow to condemn the war, but the most important opinion of all these national leaders is that of President Volodymyr Zelensky. In his press conference in Kyiv on the day of the anniversary, Zelensky said, quote, "We have seen that the devil is not somewhere underground but among us," end quote, and emphasized the war was not a local dispute between unhappy neighbors, but that of Ukrainians who were fighting and dying for civilized European values and for freedom.
Ericka joining us at the desk. So Ukraine and Russia obviously have very different ideas of how this war is going to end, and they've had different ideas throughout it. So how have each of these countries kind of manifested that outcome that they predict?
Yeah, so it's kind of difficult because neither leader for both Russia and Ukraine and those officials associated with the government has set a clear, exact outcome that they want. I mean, there's been a 10-point peace plan put out by Ukraine to kind of talk about reparations and withdrawal of troops. But overall, there's been a bunch of different peace efforts suggested, but nobody's actually sat down at the table to have a conversation.
Ericka, let's pivot now. You know, much of the conversation over this year of war has been about policy and the military, but you know, one thing that sometimes we don't always focus on are the people that are affected by this, the citizens of Ukraine. Some of them still in the country, some of them have had to uproot their entire lives, some of them coming to the United States of America. Right. What has it been like for them?
So it's kind of difficult, obviously, because in Ukraine, the Ukrainian military just reported over 27 air missiles and then 75 air strikes just over this weekend, while many families were burying soldiers in large mass graves around Kyiv and Busha and all these larger cities. But in Russia, actually, it's actually illegal to call the war a war. So there have been different forms of solidarity where you see citizens of Russia laying flowers at monuments for Ukrainian poets and finding ways to kind of get around it. And they're using this to stand in solidarity with them. But over the weekend, over 20 people were arrested because of demonstrations. But you're seeing different ways that people are stepping up in both countries to show solidarity, to speak out against this war.
And it's very interesting too. I quite frankly can't remember the last time something happened in Russia where you saw that kind of solidarity, where people, knowing that they could face consequences from the government, go and still do those actions anyway. Ericka Love, thank you so much. Moving to West Africa, where Nigerians voted in what many see as the closest election since military rule ended. Turnout is high, especially among young people, which make up a third of that population, a fast-growing one, by the way. Yet delays in some attacks at some polling stations postponed voting. Adrianna Haydarova joins us to talk about the main candidates and their efforts to turn Nigeria around on issues like security and poverty. Adrianna, walk us through what happened at the polling stations over the weekend.
Good afternoon, Chile and Teagan. Delays, reports of ballot box snatching, and attacks by armed men characterized this election. One voter reported that they saw broken ballot boxes, disabling them from participating in this selection process. In those areas where election did go smoothly, the results will be counted and announced in the coming days. The race comes down to three main players: Peter Obi from the Labour Party, Bola Tinubu from All Progressiveness Congress, and Atiku Abubakar of People's Democratic Party. The next president will be handed over a country with a tanking economy, poverty, insecurity, which is the #1 concern that candidates addressed in their campaigns. To win, a candidate needs to get the majority vote and the 25% of ballot cast in the 2/3 of Nigeria's 36 states in order to be declared the winner. Since the race is tight, we may end up seeing a runoff, a first in Nigeria's history.
Now, Adrianna, you know, we have these different candidates, the more established parties, the PDB, the APC, but you have Peter Obi running there as that newcomer, as that young guy. A lot of people say he'll bring a lot of young blood. Which candidate seems to be the favorite amongst Nigerians, according to popular opinion?
Peter Obi immediately stands out because he is one of the youngest out of the three candidates. He holds strong support among the young people. Uniquely, Peter Obi is a businessman and one of the wealthiest people in Nigeria. Yet whenever he's seen, he's often seen without his briefcase. Whenever he travels, he tends to fly commercial, which gives him a relatability factor. In doing so, showing that he's not just fighting for the Nigerian people, but that he's also among them.
And Adrianna, so Nigeria came, to democracy from military rule only a while ago. So what actions have been put in place to facilitate this process, which, as we know now, is met with disturbances at polling stations?
Right, so as soon as these disturbances happened, members of the political parties came down to the voting stations to make sure that the voting isn't being manipulated in any way. And even before these disturbances happened, the INEC placed certain regulations in place to provide a clear, clean elections. One of these regulations was to ensure that all voters are registered and that they must do a facial recognition before voting to ensure a transparent and fair election. Back to you, Chile and Teagan.
Adrianna, thank you, and we'll keep on following that as these results start to trickle in. Still to come on Talking Points. President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan is set to go before the Supreme Court tomorrow. We'll discuss how this decision could affect millions of Americans next.
Here's to the straggly ones, the lopsided ones, the first ones, the I miss my beard ones. But hey, I look good with this ones. But no way he's grown that in a week ones. The black, brown, red, and gray ones. That one. The itchy ones. The never forgotten ones. The ones grown by Dad. The ones grown for Dad. The started late ones. The absolutely filthy ones. The drawn-on ones, the finger ones, the pin ones. The I nearly didn't do it this year ones. And the yeah, why not ones. They all raise awareness, raise funds, start conversations, and save lives. Because whatever you grow will save a bro. Learn more at Movember.com.
Jordan knows he shouldn't eat this entire bowl of nachos, but tonight he's earned that right. Because a few hours ago, in the middle of happy hour, he recognized a sign. Not from the gods or a bolt of lightning, but from a double heart, a kissy face, and a fourth ha in ha ha ha. That's when Jordan knew he was buzzed. So when it was time to go, he got a ride home instead of driving. Be a legend like Jordan. Recognize your buzzed warning signs and get a ride home. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Hey, welcome back to Talking Points. The Biden administration's student loan plan is set to go before the Supreme Court tomorrow. The president's program aims to satisfy a campaign promise of providing more relief for the more than 40 million Americans who currently hold student debt.
But with a cost of $400 billion, many across the country have claimed the program is unlawful. So, Chile, obviously debt, a really big topic of discussion right now with the debt ceiling and everything going through with that. So this being brought forward really isn't too much of a surprise.
Yeah, and Talking Points analyst
Jake Morel joining us, of course,
as well. I think one of the things to mention here is that a lot of people are taking a look at college, just generally speaking, and they're looking at the price. I watched a story on the news back in, I think it was November, while I was in Connecticut for Thanksgiving break, and it's talking about how some people just can't simply afford what college is nowadays, and they need some of this loan help because Syracuse University, excess of $80,000 a year.
Yep, and going up every single year.
And a lot of private universities across the country, and even public universities too, a lot of the prices are just getting too much for people.
I think those are the key words right there, guys. Debt and prices. You talk about prices right now in this economy. We're still seeing inflation increase into 2023. The markets just had the worst week of 2023, their worst performance since October. So we're seeing the U.S. lose money and things just continue to get more and more expensive. And Teagan, you talk about debt again. I feel like this is another one of Biden's buzzwords, where it's a campaign promise he made that's now becoming a big political issue. We saw 6 Republican states sue this plan, and that's why it's going to the Supreme Court now. So it's become somewhat of a political buzzword and another campaign promise that Biden made that he's trying to carry through on right now, but it's just so hard to with Republicans trying to block him and the current economy.
Right, and on the flip side, I mean, we saw those, Republican states, go against this, but I mean, even here on campus, David Bruin, SA president, wrote a letter to President Biden with 110 other leaders from other schools asking him for this debt forgiveness. So we're seeing things on both sides of people in this situation.
Definitely, and we're just wondering about what's going to happen next here, right? There's a lot of people who are hoping that President Biden comes through with this program and that it helps them, but there's also a lot of people staying on the sidelines. They don't want this to happen because they think it would incur more in federal debt. So there's a lot of arguments to look at on definitely both sides of the aisle. But that is this week's edition of Talking Points. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CitrusTV News. I'm Chilekasi, Adele.
And I'm Teagan Brown. Have a great night, Syracuse.